Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got a really interesting gentleman, Philip Richardson, to introduce you to tonight. He's a CEO, a co-author, a keynote speaker of an organization called Black Opal Property Advisors. He's had a really interesting real estate development career, really around the world, in the United States, in Canada, and in the Middle East. And he's going to talk about one of his interests, which is taking a look at historical engineering and architecture, and how that's got longevity and some applicability to what we should be building today. Uh, Philip Richardson, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate the invitation, and good evening to you and to your audience. I look forward to sharing some of the learnings that I've gathered over my rather long career of building very large projects in different parts of the world.
I'm fascinated because you post fairly frequently pictures of historical engineering feats or buildings or bridges or aqueducts or things like this, and you talk about what an engineering marvel it was from 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. Tell me why that interest.
Well, it's actually arisen over time as I've traveled about and experienced different buildings that I've seen in various parts of the world. And why that's the case is that, you know, we have this tendency in our fast-paced society today to build quickly, um, really irrespective of how long our structures are going to last. And frankly speaking, that's not only costly to us financially, but it's actually dangerous to us and to our citizens because we all know all too well of many failures that have occurred that are really avoidable if we only look to the past for some of these lost construction wisdoms that I've been able to research and satisfy myself that they're applicable. And in fact, I've used them in various projects around the world.
So, have you spoken about this and written about it? I understand.
Well, we're presently writing our next book. The current one, of course, is Tough Resiliency, Smart Agility. And actually, this subject springs from that. What we're looking to do, or the title of our book is Ancient Secrets, Modern Solutions. And it's something that, again, we've done considerable research for this book as well as all of my career. And we really have some very fascinating ideas to share that can be used right away and to avoid losses.
Can you give me a sense of what your learnings are?
Well, when I say losses, I don't just mean we lose the building. That's financial. Of course, individual losses, humans who suffer as a result of building failures. But more importantly, a best way of looking at this is we need to build for the future. Now, we all say that, but unfortunately, it isn't delivered in reality very often. And part of it has to do, I think, is as a result of people's unwillingness to consider these past learnings, dismissing them as antique or inapplicable to today's society. So, a couple of quick examples. I've got a few stories I could tell of firsthand accounts that that I think will prove the point. Between 2007 and 2010, I led the design and development teams in Abu Dhabi for a project valued at 12 billion US dollars that integrated Ferrari World and Warner Brothers theme parks, Yas Super Regional Mall, and a world-class water park. We weren't just creating structures; we were building for the future. This project wasn't just about entertainment or shopping, it was about creating a legacy for the country that could stand the test of time. Well, obviously, to do that, it has to remain standing, it has to remain usable. And so we drew on the inspiration of a number of ancient teachings that have fallen out of favor. So I'll give you a couple of very fast examples. In this example, um, built in the UAE, which is many of your viewers will know, is adjacent to the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. We were well aware of the presence of the of water, and so what we did is we raised the site by 1 meter above sea level further to what we had originally planned. We were proactively preparing for future climate changes, not because it was easy, but because it was right. We flattened the hierarchy of our team of 500 architects and engineers and 5,000 workers, echoing the collaborative dynamics of ancient tribes. By creating direct line of communications to me, the leader, we empowered individuals from 14 different cultures to bring their best unique ideas forward, fostering innovation and agility. And some of these ideas had their roots in ancient practices. So you want me to give you a couple of specific examples? We we actually used in this particular case demountable building elements to allow future generations to effectively adapt and redefine the spaces to suit their needs. So in other words, it was a flexible system. And so, the idea was that we used, these techniques that had arisen from past usage. The Romans, had repurposable buildings, for example, colosseums and others that really suited their future growth. Now,
You've posted and bragged about the Colosseum. Tell me why.
well, the Colosseum, as we see it today, is has most of its hard elements still in place. In other words, the concrete and so on that formed it. It hasn't fallen down. No, what's missing, of course, there's some of the elements that have weathered away. The wood and so on, in particular, floors and that kind of thing. But you could imagine that if it was, if they set their minds to it, they could create a usable space because a lot of the size of the building and the acoustics of it were suitable for today's performances. So there's an example of how the Colosseum is something that can be repurposed for today's use. And this is 2,000 years after it was constructed. Why is it still standing? Well, the interesting part is that the Romans contended a lot more successfully with the forces of nature than we have, and they created these structures, including the Pantheon in Rome, along with aqueducts and roads throughout their former empire. Again, 2,000 years ago. How did they do this? Well, they used a substance that they innovated called Roman cement. Now, what that amounts to, it's a very simple formula and one that's available to us to use today. And it consists of 1 part lime, 1 part volcanic ash, and 3 parts of aggregate mixed with seawater. This is so resilient, it can even be set underwater and it gets stronger in the presence of water, not weaker. So you can imagine that, how useful that the Roman cement would be if we incorporated that in our construction. But
And
today,
and we don't use
when
it today?
no, well, guardedly, I'll say that. In North America, no. And instead, what we've done almost universally for 150 years is we've created structures that rely upon reinforcing rods of steel within the cement and that we pour. And the problem is because water is such a pervasive substance, it gets to them and it corrodes them. And we know very well it creates building collapses. I mean, the fact is, when we look at recent day examples, what was it? Not 5, 6 years ago,
The buildings
we
in
had
Miami.
we had the Miami building collapse with the loss of 98 people, suddenly collapsed, and it wasn't without warning. Engineers were giving them, dire predictions about the need to remedy them. That for other reasons they didn't do that. But the point is, there was a building that had been created relatively recently that failed, and so the result is that that's the sort of thing that needs to be incorporated, Roman cement, in new structures of this sort. It can't save the structures that are already created. So, as an example, in the condo in which we live, um, 2 years was spent by the management team to basically completely redo the underground parking garage because it was subject to failure. And they did so, and they extended the life by, say, another 30 or 40 years of the building. But they continued to use rebar. So, had they used Roman cement instead of that, they would have had potentially perhaps hundreds of years ahead of the lifespan of that building's garage and without the risk. So, there's an example that could be used, by North American development companies, of which I'm a part of this industry. And that's part of why I'm preaching this is because of the durability that it introduces into our designs. Now, the good news is that in Italy, I've spoken just recently with one of the senior officials in the shopping center industry there, and 40% of their new construction uses Roman cement. Now, that speaks to their attention to the ancient learnings that they have from their predecessors, the Romans, because all they have to do is look around and they see 2,000-year-old structures that are still standing. So, we can learn that, we can apply it, and we ought to, in my opinion.
This is fascinating. I really appreciate you telling us. I've got to take a break for some messages, and we're going to come back in just 2 minutes with Philip Richardson talking about what we can learn from the way that people 2,000 years ago constructed and engineered structures, buildings, etc. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes.
Thank
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Our guest tonight is Philip Richardson. He's got quite a history in building and real estate development and engineering, and he posts about what we could learn from people in the past. And Phil, you said you had another example from your Chinese development. Tell us about that, please.
Sure. Well, I actually have many examples, but this is a really important one. When I led the development of the 30 billion US dollar Twin Cities mixed use project in Kunming, China between 2010 and 12, um, we were searching for methods to ensure the preservation of the asset we were creating. I mean, that's a lot of money by anybody's terms, and so the owners and the society were attentive to the use of ancient practices and encouraging the extension of the life and safety of these of their projects. So, as an example, we and I know this will almost sound amusing because it did to me originally until I realized that it worked, and that is that the ancient structures that we see in China, as an example, a good example is the Great Wall of China, which I had the pleasure of visiting on one occasion, and there it is. It started construction 2,000 years ago, yet we can still see it, walk on it, and so on. Now its use is is obsolete. It doesn't need to protect against the Mongols, but the point is that construction technique was something from which we could learn, and we did.
What did we
So,
learn from the Great Wall of China?
well, the funny part is that they enhanced their cement mix to include an organic element in plentiful supply. And you'll laugh when I tell it to you. It's sticky rice. They literally put it into the mixture. Sticky rice. And that is a substance that allowed that it gave it the durability that it has over and above, regular cement that they were creating. Now that sounds ironic and a bit humorous, but that worked. And so, why have these lessons learned been lost to us? Why are they not prevalent today? Well, a lot of virtually every country, especially the older ones like Italy and China and so on, have experienced massive shifts in social in their societies, and during those times, the knowledge that had been gained was lost, or at least sidelined. And so the result of that was that today we don't really have an adequate reference point unless you get people like me and many others, I'm not alone, looking at the practices that resulted in the durability of these structures and start to apply them in today's environment. So this is what we did in our particular project's example, and we added other aspects too that lent to the flexibility of the future use of it. And the result is that we have a safe building, one that's usable by people not of this generation, but many generations ahead, and without the added expense, the unnecessary expense of reconstructing these things, because they've fallen down. They're repurposable. In other words, we approach them with a flexible design concept. So we can demount some of the improvements within inside them cost effectively, recreate new ones that suit society of that future day. And so, that's an enormous contribution to the wealth and safety of the countries in which these practices have been applied. And now we get the opportunity to learn from those ancient practices and use them.
You've posted quite often about the pyramids, and one of them that really struck me was you said that it was actually covered by limestone at one point in time.
Yeah, the image that you have on screen actually depicts what that looked like, and you can imagine if you've ever been in the Sahara Desert, like where I used to live, and in Egypt nearby, how brilliant the sunshine is, during the daytime, and you can then imagine, what this brilliant white limestone would look like in respect to how people observed that building and its prominence and importance. And there are more of them as well. And so at the top of it, interestingly, they had a metal again reflective gold cap to it, which sort of capped it off. So, there's an example of an enormous structure that was created, and they got full use out of it, shall we say, in respect to what they were trying to accomplish. Now, we're just learning what the purposes are to these buildings. There's a lot of conjecture about it, and anything I have to say doesn't have anything to do with aliens visiting our planet to help us create new structures, new societies, and so on. Everybody can make their own minds up about that sort of thing. But instead, we look at the lessons learned from our ancestors, and we can say to ourselves, gee, how can we apply that in today's circumstance? And now, I'm not sure I'm thinking about building a pyramid, but the fact is, if you take those reflective surfaces and you applied them to, let's say, more pedestrian buildings like shopping centers and so on, maybe there would be an appealing effect for people to see it and to remember it. I'm just sort of speculating, but my point is that there's a lot to be learned.
What
And
about what about these blind alleys, these ventilation tunnels?
well, again, in the environment in which they had the need for ventilation that we don't experience in North America. So we can look back to the structures that were created not just in the pyramids but also elsewhere across the Middle East, and you'll find attempts that were often successful where the builders designed in features that actually promoted the cooling and ventilation of the interior spaces, air movement, and so on. And so air would be introduced into a lower space that would cool it because of its presence. Then it would be transported up into the living space and expelled at the top. So a simple idea, but one that doesn't require any electricity to run. It's structured into the deal, so it's cost effective.
And then you actually talk about a few restaurants.
Well, restaurants are interesting if potentially because we all like to eat, right? And so the learnings I've had through my international experiences in particular, but also domestically, have convinced me about how important um, food is to us. And so restaurants today are taking on board a lot of the different past learnings that were made, and they're biblical in age. They go back 3, 4,000 years. So, as an example, Leviticus in the Bible predicted that or preached that there was the importance in their world to differentiate between clean and unclean animals. And what they meant by that was that animals that basically processed garbage, like pigs and oysters and so on, are to be avoided for personal safety. So that isn't so much necessary in today's environment, but think about this. If we like to eat oysters, and I do, um, the fact is that you've got to think about what is contained in them these days. And very often it's the case when they're farmed, um, different elements are used to make them more appealing and to make them more durable. And those elements include chemicals that more and more we're learning about are not good for us. And so, we need to review, these ancient learnings to determine, gee, maybe there are some practices that we should reintroduce that would promote our health. And today we look at the ingredients of a lot of North American food, and God, the list is long of all chemicals that I have no idea what they're good for, and except somebody's determined that it improves the appearance of the safety of the food we're eating, but I don't think we've given a lot of thought to the long-term effects. So, restaurants that use these what can now be called sustainable practices is an example of what's old is new again.
I toured the Pantheon in Rome, and you use it as another example of a incredible building.
Impressive, isn't it?
Is again just the Roman cement that's the key?
Well, that and two other aspects, design. So the Romans are famous for having, produced and designed the Roman arch, which is that rounded feature that you see in a lot of the aqueducts and so on. And that rounded arch was used across the empire and produced durable, sustainable, tools, shall we call it, for their societies. So, as an example, today there are aqueducts that are still in use today to provide for cities' water, and they were constructed 2,000 years ago using the Roman arch as their basic design, combined with the Roman cement that lent to their durability. So it's a combination of things. There's one more aspect to it as well. We can't forget that we have a responsibility when we inherit these buildings in the future. And that is our responsibility is to measure them, measure their performance to make sure that they're not failing, that that they're going to be safe to use and won't fall down. And so these practices I'm describing come together in the maintenance and usability of these in the future. So there's a responsibility we have, and it's an important philosophical point to make. It's not a fire and forget kind of practice that we're engaged with. It's forward thinking that brings us to what we believe will be safer, more durable projects and reusable because we make them flexibly designed. And I've got a few more examples I give you whenever you'd like.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, as an example, a modern day application of our learnings, again, driven by the flexibility I've talked to you about the reusability of space. So the Romans were pretty good at it. They would take a Colosseum that would normally be used for, let's say, gladiators fighting, and then they produce them in such a way that they could flood them and actually have sea battles depicted on them. Remembering there was no TV at the time, the emperors wanted to extol the virtues of their
They'd
naval
flood the whole
victories.
Colosseum?
Yeah, they would flood it, and Circus Maximus was a better example in Rome, in that entire huge facility, which seated, by the way, 250,000 people, pretty big by today's standards. They would flood it, and they would conduct these naval battles, and with real ships and, and people whaling away at each other. And so there was a utilization that they had that was multiple, and so they they had these different engineered repurposing aspects within the design. So today, fast forward, when I created the design along with a big team, it's not just me, of course, um, in China, what we did was we took the car parks, the parking garages that we needed to support the businesses, And we created a special design that included exterior ramps to access it. What that's important, as I'll tell you in a minute. That allowed us to create flat floors in the parking garage. And secondly, we created clear spaces between the levels of 22 feet and introduced in the middle of them steel structures on which parking would be had that were ultimately demountable in the future. So imagine 50 years from now when none of us are driving cars. Hey, maybe 10 years from now. And you take that space that no longer accommodates cars, but what do you want to repurpose it? So you take out that structural steel. Now you got 22 clear height of space, and within that you can create new purposes. Good example would be residential. A lot of apartments could be fitted into that redesigned facility. The result of which is you're bringing your market closer and closer to you for the shopping center. So there's a flexibility that I'm describing that we should use too, because don't forget, number one, we don't have to tear these structures down to build something more usable in the future, saving a lot of money. We don't have to witness them falling down, costing us not only a lot of money, but more importantly, human lives. And lastly, we can match up for future generations by providing for their imagination to come into play and to reuse that space in their particular special way in the future. So that's called foresight, and that's something that we basically need to reintroduce into our thinking in North America.
Philip, before we go, I've got to ask you about this map. You've posted it a few times. Tell me why you think it's important.
Well, again, it's produced by a Japanese scientist, and it wasn't just recent. He produced it about 20 years ago after a lot of research. But what he did was he created what amounts to a different way of looking at the world and how its countries are assorted and arranged. And, you know, we've for many years we've used the Mercator standard of map, and the reason for that was that at least within the zone in which a lot of travel was conducted, um, reliable results for navigation could be produced for the mariners. But moving ahead to today's purposes, one of the things we'd like to know about is where are the oceans? How do they fit into the overall picture we have of the world? I mean, the 70% of the world's surface is composed of water. You'll notice on this map, it emphasizes the amount of water that we're dealing with, number one. Number two, it also attempts to and succeeds in depicting the countries in their actual size. So you don't get a Greenland that looks the size of Europe, in the as in the Mercator map. So these are the kind of evolutions in imagery that I think are useful for our present generation to allow us to think about what it is that we want to do, respecting our view of the world. Now, I'm sensitive to time passing, and you tell me what my limits are, please, Brian. But
We're gonna have to cut it off now.
okay.
But this has been fascinating. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to send my message, and hopefully we'll get a lot of people who are interested enough to reach out and research it further.
Philip, people might be interested in what your topic is. So do you encourage them to connect up with you on LinkedIn, or how can they best monitor your really interesting posts?
Well, LinkedIn is the format, the platform that I use most often, and you'll find me there. My LinkedIn name is Philip J. Richardson, and people can navigate to find me, and they'll see a great picture of my wife, an okay picture of me together on the on the
This has been
profile.
absolutely fascinating. I really appreciate you telling us a little bit about how historical structures and construction and engineering can really lead to some learnings for today and some practices that we should be considering applying in today's construction and development. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We've been chatting with Phil Richardson about building and what history of engineering and building materials and building structures and styles and all that kind of stuff can teach us about building today. Phil, you said you had some conclusions you wanted to suggest to us.
Yeah, basically, I don't just have a curiosity. I really like the information I've gathered and learned, the past lessons learned that I've found, because they have application today. And in fact, many of them are being applied after having been rediscovered, but not yet in North America. A good example is Roman cement. Some 40% of a new Italian construction, the country of its origin, use Roman cement, and it's been known to be very durable, very safe, and so on. And after all, we're looking today at the Pantheon. We're looking at aqueducts that are 2,000 years old. So that's a pretty good certification. So it's the improved safety that is particularly interesting to me. And when you think about the Surfside condominium collapse, where 98 people were killed, that could have been prevented had they used Roman cement in place of conventional cement. So that's an important conclusion to draw. We want to improve safety, and we need to do it in all new builds now. And it's readily available technology. We today can use our new technological progress to improve the delivery of these systems. So all good things are waiting for us to apply. So that's probably the first thing I'd like to draw as a conclusion. Secondly, um, they've all they've added great flexibility to our systems. And after all, at the end of the day, rendering it into a sort of a financial decision, it's much more cost effective to use these because they don't fall down. And the result is they don't have to be replaced. They don't tax the public or the insurance system, relative to replacement of these facilities. So that's a very important consideration going forward.
Phil, I got to
I
ask you
think,
this, these
yeah,
pictures of Pacific Palisades where, tens of thousands of homes have been destroyed, but there's a few that were left. And I think some of them were concrete, and other of them were built in a way that they really were far more resilient than the others. Is there some learning there?
yes, there is. For example, the structures that did survive, not all, but many, were one level structures. And they did not, for example, have vents into the ceiling space that were automatically the admission of the fire into most of the homes. So they didn't have those features. They engineered out those problems, and today the bureaucracy that we've developed demands that you put them in. So obviously that's got to be changed. As well, you made the point of the concrete as compared to other building materials. And again, Roman cement could be applied in this example. So, we have these technologies available to us now. And you bring up a very interesting point. Climate change is with us, whether we'd like to pretend it's not. It may or may not be as a result of human activity. I mean, we know that volcanoes can add CO2 that equates to the whole emissions that are produced in a year by humans. So it doesn't matter where it comes from, it's happening. And so, it's very important to embrace these technologies to ensure that we add resiliency to our species. My interest in resiliency, of course, through the authorship of Tough Resiliency, Smart Agility. Well, this is an example of how it needs to be applied, by governments and by our society to improve our odds of survival. There's no guarantees for us. So we need to use our resiliency and our ingenuity and agility to uh, ensure that our future is more secure. I think that these are very important lessons, and I think that more and more people are becoming attuned to it. Think about not just the wildfires, but also other events, flooding, um, volcanic activity, um, earthquakes. We can actually use these ancient technologies to improve the survivability of our structures, our buildings, our infrastructure, and all aspects that we rely on for modern civilization.
So, some of the structures that you've posted on your Instagram and LinkedIn feeds are Roman and European. And the I think it's the Pantheon that you talked about that has the roof still standing today. The pyramids that you described as these marvels, and that we actually don't even realize that they were covered by marble. Do we do enough trying to understand, the successes of history, the building materials of history, the structures, the way that that roof was built, the way that the pyramids were actually constructed? Do we learn enough from the past, or do we
Well,
just ignore
that's a very good point. One of our foibles as humans, and I've made a study of it because I have a recent degree in consumer psychology, and it's helped me to gain insights into the way people think and the way people act. And fact is, we have what we call a set point. We arrive at a particular point, our way of thinking, and so on, and it's hard to move us off that. And so when you talk about developing an appetite or a curiosity about these ancient systems, and even more daunting to apply them, there's a tendency amongst humans to not do that. They're content with staying the way they are. They don't like change. But when we're faced with existential challenges, we must embrace change. And we hear this a lot. Well, there's a reason for it. We've got to do it. And so the answer to the question that you've asked is very interesting. We have to overcome our basic tendency to not change in order to adjust our circumstances to survive. This is not a matter of just should we do it, it's we must do it.
I got to ask, is that a sword in behind you?
Yeah, that's I was the honorary colonel for North American Air Defense Command, the Canadian wing and squadrons for 14 years, and that's my ceremonial sword that I carried in parades.
I was wondering if it was going to be a samurai sword or something like that that had some historical significance, but it does have some historical significance. Congratulations on that role that you played.
Thank you
Um,
kindly.
so you've talked about resilience, you've talked about building materials and building structures, you've talked about learning from the history. People don't really do this. Why not?
Well, it goes back to that inertia that we have about not wanting to change. And there's some leadership that's being provided for us in various facets. When I built the 30 billion US dollar development in Kunming, China, I led that development. There were thousands of people. It wasn't just me. And what we did was we used an ancient practice, which the Chinese have revived, which accounts for why the Great Wall of China is still standing. That is, I know it sounds a little funny, but it's not. They included sticky rice into their cement mixtures, their concrete mixtures, and that organic element improved the durability of the cement, and it's visible. The Great Wall of China is largely still standing. So
Hold
these
it, hold
lessons,
it. You're saying the secret to the Great Wall of China is sticky rice?
I know it sounds absurd, but
That sounds absurd.
it's scientifically proven,
But
and
the
in
rice
fact,
would degrade over time and be gone.
it does. But what happens is the organic elements do not. They deteriorate, but they're still present. And so what they do is the elements create a greater ability of the concrete to absorb concrete and to self heal, and that's the secret to it.
The concrete self heals?
That's right, as does Roman cement. It self-heals. You can actually set it underwater, and particularly in the presence of seawater, and it sets and in the presence of future water incursions, it actually improves. It heals any cracks and fissures that may have arrived. So similar process.
Unbelievable. I really appreciate you joining us and telling us something about historic building materials and building structures and what we can learn from history. You've got a book about resilience. Tell us the title of the book, please.
The title of the book is Tough Resiliency, Smart Agility, and it applies to the lessons learned that we've gathered, not just our own, but many others through our research, to help all of us today to guide us in improving our resiliency. We call it tough resiliency because it's the optimal form. We call it smart agility because it's the optimal form of agility. And these are techniques that we really need to have. It's not optional, and it delves into a whole lot of research that we've done. But more importantly, it gives actionable items that people can follow through on today.
And if people want to check out some of your posts about historical structures and materials, what's the best way to do that? Go to your LinkedIn site or what?
Yes, LinkedIn, we issue a weekly newsletter, for example, and we talk about that. And we also issue posts, reposts. The most recent repost that I did on one topic actually gathered 620,000 viewers worldwide. So it's obviously a topic of interest and it's attracting a lot of attention. So, I
Gosh, I'm
remember.
gonna have to go check it out. What was it on?
That was on that one in particular was on the newly conceptualized mapping that Japanese have produced, Japanese scientists have produced, that helps us see the world in a more realistic, proportional format. So it assists us in understanding what our challenges are relative to global warming. What you'll see is three-quarters of the globe is water, as an example. So, respecting our oceans is obviously top of our list.
Yeah, pretty key. Phil Richardson, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity. I look forward to talking with you again.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'll remind you I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. And all my podcasts and videos go up on social media, on podcast servers, on YouTube, as soon as the radio show goes to air. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Good night.
Good evening.